Hello and welcome to the first in this series of nutrition talks from me. I'm Charlie Bluestone, the owner of CB Nutrition, my own performance nutrition consultancy, and I'm going to do a few workshops for you members of Black Country Barbell, just around some basics on nutrition and how you can optimize your nutrition to get everything that you can out of your training performance. So first of all, we're going to touch on energy balance, which underpins everything that we do with nutrition, and making sure that we get our energy balance right. We understand what energy balance is and how we manipulate that, and also what are the consequences if we don't get that right, which we'll come on to later on. So first of all, it's important to know what energy balance is. So it's effectively the energy in through food and drink versus the energy out, or the calories burnt. And there are a number of different ways that we do this, which again, I'll come on to in a moment. But that is effectively what energy balance is. So it's just a balance between those two things. So if we look at that equation, most people know that to drop weight, we need a calorie deficit. To gain weight, we need a calorie surplus. And to maintain weight, we need energy maintenance. But that's not strictly true. That's only true when we talk about body fat. So not all mass is the same. So that would be for a change in body fat mass, but we know that the body is made up of more than just body fat. So if we look at these scans here from something called a DEXA scan, you can see all the different types of tissue. There's skeletal muscle, there's organs, other tissues, bone tissue, and body fat as well. So when we talk about energy balance equations, we're looking at fat mass and exclusively just fat mass. So changes in mass don't reflect changes in fat mass necessarily. And this explains this a lot more. So you can't drop body fat in a calorie surplus. You must be in a calorie deficit to do that. However, you can gain muscle in a calorie deficit, a calorie maintenance, or in a calorie surplus. And that's because the mechanisms for how we do that are regulated by protein intake and not energy intake per se. And if you go on to the macros and the nutrient timing workshops within this series, you'll get a little bit more information about how that works. However, even though I say that it's not energy intake that determines changes in muscle mass, it does influence changes in muscle mass. So we can gain muscle mass in a deficit at maintenance or in a surplus. However, it's optimal in a surplus. It's much more difficult to gain muscle mass in a deficit than it is a surplus, but we know it can be done. Again, there'll be differences for people that are very well trained and have been training for a number of years. Gaining muscle in a deficit is much harder. And it's much easier to do it in a surplus. But we now have good research showing that you can gain muscle in a deficit. So metabolism, when people talk about metabolism, they don't generally know what it means. And it is just this, it's the chemical processes that go on to maintain life. So the breakdown of the food you consume to maintain your life. And it really has nothing to do with fat loss specifically or on its own. So there are a lot of different questions about metabolism, about what it is. There's a lot of myths. One of them potentially is we can stoke the metabolic fire, or we need to, or having multiple meals will do that. Metabolism changes as we age, metabolic damage, so can we actually damage our metabolism? And what people mean when they say metabolism is this: total daily energy expenditure. So the calories that we burn day to day is what most people mean when they say metabolism. They get the two a little bit confused. So metabolism is made up of these four different factors. So there's basal metabolic rate, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, exercise activity thermogenesis, and the thermic effect of food. And I'll explain what each of those are in a moment. So basal metabolic rate is if you were to lie in your bed and do absolutely nothing, these are the calories that you need to survive. So all of the different systems, so muscular, bone system, reproductive system, the respiratory system, nervous system, etc., all take a certain amount of calories just to maintain them and keep them going. And that's what your basal metabolic rate is. Exercise activity thermogenesis is the calories that you burn doing planned exercise. So that can be at the gym, can be playing football, can be going out for a run. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis is any activity that burns calories that isn't a planned type of exercise. So gardening, walking to work, going up the stairs, fidgeting, shuffling, etc. And we know how important that is for weight loss. So there's some research showing that's the difference between two people of the same weight with the same energy intake will be due to differences in how they move day to day. So step counts is a really common way of measuring this and keeping on top of this. Thermic effect of food, so that's just how many calories that we burn just digesting the food. Um, and one of the reasons that we use a high protein diet very frequently in fat loss is that high protein diets take more energy to digest the food themselves. So if you're eating a higher amount of your food as protein, your body will burn more calories trying to digest that protein. So it's slightly more efficient in that respect. So a few questions and myths around energy balance and fat loss. The amount of meals does not affect your fat loss at all. There is no metabolic fire that we can stoke. Uh, thermic effect of food is the same regardless of how frequently you have those meals. So it has no meaningful impact. You could lose weight on one meal, you could lose weight on 15 meals if they were calorie matched. Can you eat after 7 p.m.? Yes, and still lose body fat if that's your goal. So the timing of your food doesn't really have any relevance. I always say to people, like this idea that at 6:59 you can eat and be fine, and then 7 o'clock your body shuts off any attempts to burn fat and just stores it is ridiculous. However, a lot of people, if they eat after 7 o'clock, it's normally alcohol and then quite high calorie snacks that don't really fill them up, and they're not really paying attention to what they're eating. So it's chocolate, crisps, nuts, etc. Those calories do add up, and that's normally why people eat after 7 o'clock struggle to lose body fat. It's nothing to do with anything physiological. It's just what are they eating at those times, and are they mindful of how much they're actually eating and consuming? Do I need to do cardio to drop body fat? No. It's a way of increasing your energy expenditure, so it can shift the energy balance equation slightly. So obviously, if you burn more calories, then you can consume the same calories or consume more calories and still be in a calorie deficit overall. Something to be mindful of if you're strength training or if you're serious about your training, constantly adding in more cardio to create a bigger deficit is another stress on the body. So that might affect your recovery, and you might be better off getting a better handle on your nutrition than constantly adding more cardiovascular exercise to burn more calories. So it is a bit of a trade-off in that respect. Carbohydrates don't make you fat, regardless of what people think. There's nothing inherently fattening about carbohydrate. Um, they can be slightly easier to overconsume, so particularly white carbohydrate that are low in fiber. They're very easy to eat, a lot of them, and then an hour later you don't feel hungry, so you carry on eating. So although there's nothing physiologically making you fat because of carbohydrate, if the way you eat them can affect how much you eat, which will affect your energy balance, so therefore will change your body fat. So something to be mindful of is if you're constantly just eating carbohydrate, you won't feel much fuller after your meals, and you'll consistently eat more and more to feel fuller, and that's when your energy intake will exceed your expenditure. So the theory of all of this that I've just said is extremely simple. Most people can get their head around it. It all makes complete sense. It's the application that's complex, and that's why so many people struggle. Is how do they actually do it themselves, um, and how do they make it work for them? So just to touch on how you can calculate your calorie targets yourself. So first of all, we need to calculate that BMR, so the calories we need to survive. And these are the equations. This is the Mifflin St. Jean equation. There are multiple ones out there. This is one that you can use and just plug the numbers in and you will get your BMR. Alternatively, you can use a much more simple one, which is your body mass in kilograms times these numbers. They're both just equations. They're both estimates, so it doesn't matter too much which you use, and it's important to not get completely hung up on which one is best, because without being in a lab and spending loads of money, you won't find out exactly what it is. So an estimate is absolutely fine. From there, you'll need to multiply this by a physical activity level. So if you look at this table, you need to sort of estimate how much exercise you're doing. I know these are quite vague and there are slightly more in-depth ways of doing it, but this is a very basic example. There are probably better calculators online that you can use, but you gauge how much physical activity you're doing, and there are ranges for those as a male or a female, times your BMR by that number, and you will get your maintenance calories. So your BMR times your physical activity level will be your maintenance calories. Now, if you times that number by 1.1, that would be a 10% increase in your calories, which would be a slight calorie surplus and would be useful if you were looking to gain weight or optimize your muscle mass gain. And then if you're looking to lose weight, times that by 0.8 is a 20% deficit, which is which obviously both of those can be changed. It's quite a substantial deficit. It depends on your goal, your timeline, etc., how you do that. But they're just two examples of how you could go about calculating your calories. Why is it important to get this right? And this is something that's not really spoke about a lot in the fitness industry, or in general gym population, but it is very prevalent in the work that I do in sports teams and elite sport. So energy availability is the amount of dietary energy left after exercise for all of those processes that your body does to survive. So anything that BMR is looked after, it's the amount of energy that you've got left after you've exercised for those processes. So why is that important, and what can happen if we don't get that right? So this is the female athlete triad. So you can see in the bottom left there that low energy availability can sometimes be with or without an eating disorder. So if your energy intake doesn't match what you're doing, then you will have low energy availability. That can come with functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is the loss of the menstrual cycle in females. Um, this, for me as a nutritionist, is a massive red flag that someone is hugely under eating compared to what their energy expenditure is. Um, and it's basically due to hormonal dysfunction, because the endocrine system is one of the systems that's affected by low energy availability, and your body is effectively saying, well, we don't have enough energy to maintain us, we're not going to keep running this reproductive system that's supposed to sustain another life if we know that we're not going to be able to, because we can't even sustain our life, so we're not going to be able to look after another human as well. um, those hormonal changes can affect many systems, which I'll come on to, but one of them is the um, is your bone tissue. And over time, bone is constantly turned over, so it's broken down and built back up. But if you don't have enough energy, then it's broken down more than it's built up. And over time, your bone mineral density gets smaller, so you get thinner bones, which can lead to early onset osteoporosis, osteopenia, and these other bone conditions. So we know that we are constantly laying down bone until we get to our 30s, and that's when our bones are at its thickest. And from there, it will get thinner and thinner as we age. However, if before this time you have low energy availability for a period of time, you will get these bone disorders that you normally see in 60, 70, 80-year-olds in teens and 20s. So I've worked with athletes with a 19-year-old with 9 stress fractures. I've worked with um, a female athlete with osteoporosis at 20, and it's because they've failed to match their energy availability, their energy intake with their expenditure for a long period of time, or very severely. So it's really important that we don't go for a huge deficit and loads of exercise, because over time we'll fail to match the two together. Our energy availability will be too low, and we'll suffer with these disorders. So that was the female athlete triad. This has been developed a little bit to the relative energy deficiency in sport, to include the fact that men also see exactly the same thing. The issue with men is obviously they don't have the menstrual function to sort of as a red flag. We can't see it in them because they don't have the loss of the period, because they don't have one. On the right, there are all of these performance effects, which obviously are debilitating for an athlete if they're competing in the sport, if they're interested in their training. But on the left, we have all of these different clinical markers as well. So, like I said, bone health is affected, menstrual function affected due to the endocrine system. Different metabolic markers, growth and development are impaired, psychological, so mood, depression, decreased concentration, irritability, cardiovascular, gastrointestinal is a big one. So a lot of people struggle with digestion because digestion takes energy. And if you don't have enough energy, people will start thinking they've got intolerances and sensitivities, when really they're just not eating enough food. And if they ate enough food, then those intolerances would go away because they have sufficient energy to digest their food properly. So just to summarize, we need to alter our energy intake to alter our body fat relative to our energy expenditure. So one side of that equation needs to move. There are different components to the energy expenditure, and it doesn't really matter which one you change. BMR, you can't really change much in the short term. Long term, if you gain muscle, it will change slightly. Thermic effective food, you can change through your diet, and then your activity, either planned or not planned, you can change. And having a very low energy intake in the short term or a reduced energy intake for a prolonged period can lead to lots of negative health effects. So it's really important that you understand that and how we manage those symptoms as well. So thank you for listening. I hope that's been useful.